Hi mums and dads, I'm Dr. Nelu Simmons. I'm a paediatric doctor and I'm here to chat about some important kids' health topics. On today's episode, we'll be diving into what exactly a virus is, having a chat with Dr. Jessica Stokes-Parish about how we can determine fiction from truth in health education, looking at what dehydration does and what you can do about it at home, and getting some health advice from my cutest new friend, Lily. But first, I'd like to explain a little bit about fevers. Fever is something that really concerns parents. Now, it's important to know that fever in itself is not harmful. It's actually a very normal way of the body fighting infection. And in fact, it indicates a normal immune response. For us, it is the cause of the fever that's most important. Now, the first thing I should mention is, what is a fever? It is any temperature 38 and above. The only time that the number of the fever itself is important is if the child is less than 3 months. If they're less than 3 months, regardless of how well they are, they should always be seen by a doctor. For children older than 3 months, it depends on how they're going, what their symptoms are, and what the potential cause of the fever is before you get too worried. Now, some symptoms of fever include that the child can be hot or sweaty, sometimes have the shakes. They can be breathing fast, be a bit cool to touch, even though they feel very hot, and they can be very miserable and upset. Occasionally, fevers can cause what we call febrile seizures, which is a fit when the child has a fever. This can be very scary for parents, but mostly it's harmless and resolves very quickly. But you should see a doctor if this happens. A few things that we don't recommend parents do when children have a fever is pop them in a cold bath, or to not give them any medication because they're worried about masking a fever. So what are some things that you can do if your child has a fever? For me, the most important thing is to make sure that your child is comfortable. So medication like paracetamol and ibuprofen can be really helpful when a child has a fever. Not to bring the temperature down, because like I said, the actual number of the fever isn't the main concern, but the paracetamol and ibuprofen can help make them feel better. And if they're feeling better, then they're more likely to drink and be comfortable. Paracetamol and ibuprofen works really well if taken together as well. So just check with the pharmacist that this is safe for your child and make sure that you're giving the correct dose in the 24-hour period. But make sure that you're staying on top of their misery with some pain relief. The next thing is to keep up the fluids as best you can to avoid dehydration, and I'll chat more about that later. And the last thing is to think about what could be causing the fever. If your child has a cough or a cold, sore throat, or other symptoms that could be causing a fever, you don't necessarily need to see anyone unless you're worried. But if there is no cause at all after 24 or 48 hours, it's a good idea to see a doctor at that stage. Other times to see a doctor include if your child is less than 3 months, as I mentioned, every few days if the fever is continuing or longer than expected, or if there's any change in symptoms. And of course, if there are any symptoms that you are worried about, or any of the following symptoms. Things like a rash that doesn't disappear when you press it, features of dehydration, if the pain doesn't improve with paracetamol or ibuprofen, if there's any heavy breathing, there's neck stiffness or your child is refusing to look at the light, or if they're very tired. Now stay tuned and I'm going to chat a bit more about viruses and dehydration. Now we will be chatting to Dr. Jessica Stokes-Parish. Jess is a registered nurse and holds a PhD in medicine. She is really passionate about health education and diversity. Today she's here to talk to us about how we can determine truth from fiction in health education. Welcome to the show, Jess. Now you've had quite the interesting journey. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jess?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So, a little bit about me. I'm a nurse, as you said. I have worked in oncology and intensive care, and it started me. Actually, I always knew I wanted to get into education. I loved education. So, I started working in the space of simulation, which is where we use mannequins and we recreate scenarios to help health professionals learn. And along the way, I've kind of stumbled through and done more postgraduate training and culminating in doing a PhD, which was completed this year, which is awesome.
Oh, that's so exciting. Now, I know that one of your passions is health education and really educating the broader community about that. Now, there's so much information out there. Can you just talk to us a bit about what makes a source reliable and how do we figure that out and navigate that?
You're not wrong, Nelu. It's so hard to navigate information. We have so many sources available to us. And so, some of the tips that I suggest to indicate whether something is reliable or not is whether it takes into account context, or is it extreme. So, some examples of extreme might be telling you to follow a certain diet with your children, or not using certain I guess, principles with your kids. And so it's really all about making sure that the information that you're given is appropriate for you in your situation, which we know is so different for everyone.
Right. So, how do we check if information is reliable? So, say a parent wants to find out about something, how do they know what they can believe and what they can't, shouldn't believe?
So the first thing that I suggest to look at is who's the author? Who's writing this piece of information, or who's speaking in the video? Do they have the appropriate qualifications? Are they a nurse? Are they a doctor? And if they are, do they have the right training, the right specialist training to be able to talk about that? As you know, anyone can talk about anything on the internet these days. We're inundated with messages, aren't we? Even if the message says, um, this is from a nurse, you need to find out who is that nurse, what's their name, where have they got their qualifications, can you check those qualifications? The other thing that I would say is check for a conflict of interest. So what I mean by that is the person trying to sell something to you. Are they trying to sell a product? Are they trying to sell a service? Is there some reason why they're telling you this information which would help them make profit?
Oh, they're really important tips to remember. And I think, especially with parents, there's just so much information out there. What are sort of the main websites or sources that you would recommend for parents gathering information if they want to know about fever or something, for example?
It's a great question. And there are so many resources out there that are in multiple languages, that are in video form, written form. What I like to recommend is Raising Children. I think it's .net.au. And the other one is the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. They're really accessible information, and you'll find your local hospital and health service also has information about fevers and anything general around your child's health.
That is all so useful. Now, for the benefit of our broad range of viewers who have various different cultural backgrounds, what's some of the issues that they might come across and what's some of the advice that you can give them?
It comes back to that example of the WhatsApp message, for example. I think that we trust our family, we trust our friends, and there are so many messages that are shared amongst. I remember my yaya, I'm Greek, and they, they're sending me messages saying, "Is this true? Did the nurse say this? Did the doctor say this?" No, actually, it's completely false. Somebody has fabricated it. So what I would say is, if you do get a message that's sent from a friend or a family member, just go and check the source. If there's no source or link and there's no public statement from that hospital or that source, then it's probably not accurate.
Great advice, Jess. And then, in terms of people who want to get more information, say in their own language, do you know of any sources or how they can go about getting that information?
Well, the way that I found them was I just typed in into Google raising children and languages or translations, and it actually comes up with all the spaces where the articles are in other languages. And you'll find that on all the government immunisation websites as well. You can find them in other languages. They've got quite a range. It's not fully comprehensive, but it's a pretty good range.
Oh, fantastic. That's really good to know. I guess the other thing to mention as well is that in appointments and things that there are interpreter services available generally. So I just advise parents and families to speak up if they're not understanding due to a language barrier. Do you see that a lot in your work?
Yeah, we do, and you're right. There are translators and interpreter services available in public hospitals. Sometimes there can be a bit of a delay, especially in the clinics. You have to pre-organise it. So do make sure, if you do need an interpreter, make sure that you organise it in advance so that they're able to be there.
Thanks so much, Jess, for the chat. Where can our viewers find you if they want some more information about these topics?
Oh, great question. I'm on most social media channels, so at J_Stokes-Parish. And I also have a website, jessicastokesparish.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jess, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we hear a lot about viruses. What exactly are they and what do they do? Now, there are different bugs in the environment that cause illness. Viruses are the most common. Others include things like bacteria, parasites, and other bugs out there. Viruses are exceptionally common in kids. They're spread very easily, and their immune system isn't quite developed enough to fight them off. So up until primary school age, it's really common for kids to get viruses back to back all year long, particularly if a child attends childcare, because viruses are spread so easily in a childcare setting. Now, viruses are spread often by saliva or bodily fluids, which is why kids pass them on very easily because they slobber on everything. And then other viruses, such as those that cause gastro, are spread by other bodily fluids, such as vomit or in their poo, which is why hand washing is very important. The current virus that we've all heard about, coronavirus, is a respiratory virus, so it is spread by droplets in the air. The symptoms that the virus gives your child depends on where the virus is. So for example, upper respiratory viruses such as a common cold can cause any symptoms such as cough, runny nose, blocked nose, sore ears, sore throat. They're very common and spread very easily. Other viruses, such as the gastrovirus, can cause vomiting, diarrhea. There are viruses that can impact the voice box, causing a condition called croup. Viruses that cause rashes, such as chickenpox. So as you can see, the symptoms can be so varied. The main thing for parents to note about viruses is the following. First of all, we can't treat viruses. Antibiotics treat bacterial infections, so unfortunately, most of the time with the viruses, there is no treatment, it's just time and riding it out. But what you can do is support your child through the virus. So things like paracetamol and ibuprofen, if the child is miserable with a fever or in pain with a sore throat or sore ears, they can be really helpful medications. With sore ears and sore throat in particular, that can be quite painful, so it's really important to make sure we're keeping on top of their pain. This is also important because if their pain is under control, they're much more likely to drink. And keeping up their fluids is crucial for viruses. It's in fact the most common reason why children end up in hospital is when they're not eating and drinking. And just like adults, we feel tired and we don't really want to do much when we have a virus. Children can be a bit more lethargic than usual and they can get quite clingy and need lots of cuddles. So making sure you're around for that can be very helpful. The other important thing to do is to watch out for any concerning symptoms, as mentioned before in the fever chat. I'd also get them checked every couple of days if it continues or if there's anything that changes with the symptoms. And of course, if at any point of time you are worried, you should get your child reviewed. No one knows your child like you do. Now, my next guest is a very special guest called Lily. Lily, welcome to the show and thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to chat to you.
You're welcome.
Can I first start by asking you how old you are?
5.
Oh, you're 5. And how old do you think I am?
25.
25? Oh, thank you. I will take that as a compliment. Now, Lily, I want to ask you a few questions about a whole bunch of things. Is that all right?
Yes.
So the first thing I want to ask is, do you know what a doctor is?
Yes.
What does a doctor do?
They help people make them get better.
Yeah, and how do they do that?
They do a doctor checkup.
Yeah, that's very true. We do lots of doctor checkups. Have you ever had a doctor checkup before?
Yes. So one time, I fell and I hit my eyebrow and then I had to go to the hospital and then they put glue on it and I didn't cry at all because I needed to see 2 doctors and then I got to have the TV the whole day for 2 days.
Oh, wow, you were so brave. You didn't cry at all.
No.
Have you ever had to see a doctor for anything else?
Yes, when I have sometimes when I have colds, they put a stick around my mouth. I think it's to see if you don't have the cold. They use a stethoscope to listen to your heart.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about a virus that's around at the moment? What's the most common virus you've been hearing about?
The coronavirus.
Yeah. Do you know anything about the coronavirus?
I think it makes people sick.
Yeah. How does it make people sick?
Because it has germs and germs make you sick.
So what can we do about the germs?
Wash our hands.
What other things has been happening with coronavirus?
Lockdown.
Lockdown, yeah. Can you tell me a bit about what lockdown has been like?
It's where you can't visit anyone or you can't go out.
Yeah, so has that been fun or has it been a bit tough?
A bit tough.
And when lockdown finishes, what are you most excited about?
Going back to school.
So Lily, I might finish off by asking you, what would you like to be when you grow up?
An artist.
An artist? What sort of artist?
A drawing artist.
A drawing artist. Oh, do you have any examples of your drawings that you could show us?
So here's one of them.
Oh, Lily, that's beautiful.
I did squares.
Beautiful. I can see you like colors. Well, that's beautiful, Lily. I think you are definitely an artist in the making. All right, Lily. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome.
Now, we've spoken a lot about fevers and viruses, but really the key to managing children at home is monitoring their hydration. Now, why do children become dehydrated? Any illness, such as gastro or any virus, can make children either lose fluid or not drink as much. That's often the most common reason for dehydration. Other things like excessive exercise or not drinking enough on a hot day can also cause dehydration. Dehydration is important because the body needs fluid to run. And without the fluid, children can become very tired and lethargic, but also the most concerning thing for us is that it can affect the kidneys. So it's really important to keep on top of hydration. So what are some signs that your child could be becoming dehydrated? For me, the key is to think about the urine. So dark or very smelly urine can be a sign of dehydration if they're weeing less than usual. So with babies, it's usually about less than half of their normal wet nappies, or with older children, going to wee about less than half of normal. They can sometimes look quite dry as well, so dry lips and dry tongue. Signs of severe dehydration is usually if the child is quite pale, very lethargic, so sleeping all day long. Now remember, we expect kids to be a little bit more tired than usual when they're unwell, but they should still have periods of waking up and being active, or at least be interested in drinking. But if they're so lethargic they're not doing any of those things, then we worry about dehydration. And also, with severe dehydration, children can become cool and have cool hands and feet. Now, what can you do at home if your child is starting to become dehydrated? So particularly if they've got a viral illness, they're not drinking as much, or if they're losing a lot of fluid with vomiting and diarrhea. The most important thing is to give as much fluid as possible. Now, the key to giving the fluid is to give small amounts often. The problem with giving a lot of fluid at once, it can make the child feel more unwell, or they may just refuse it altogether. So offering lots and lots of frequent sips of fluid can be much more helpful. Particularly hydration fluids that you can get from the chemist can be very helpful, especially if your child is losing fluid. So if they've got vomiting or diarrhea, they're losing very important electrolytes. So replacing that with electrolyte hydration fluid can be really helpful. Or you can try other things like icy poles or other foods with fluids such as soups or grapes that have a lot of fluid in it. So anything that you think your child might be able to eat or drink that has some fluid in it can be helpful. The other thing is with babies, the main thing is, again, short, frequent feeds. So that may be offering breastfeeds more often, but for a shorter period of time. If your child is bottle fed, popping some hydration fluid in there as well can help. The main thing to note with babies though is that they can become dehydrated much quicker than older children. So if your child is less than 6 months and you're worried about dehydration, I would suggest seeing a doctor. When would I recommend seeing someone for dehydration? As mentioned, if your child is less than 6 months of age and you're worried about dehydration, I'd definitely see a doctor then. If you're worried about them dropping their urine output, so if they're making less wet nappies than normal, generally less than half is a good sign that they need to be seen. If you're worried about them being lethargic or the reason why they are dehydrated, if that is concerning you, that's a good time to be seen. Now, what can we do to treat dehydration? If your child ends up in hospital in the emergency department, often we will trial some fluids. So that could be giving them medication to stop vomiting if they're vomiting, and then see how they go once their pain is under control and see if they can tolerate fluids that way. Occasionally, we need to pop a little tube in the nose that goes into the stomach, and that way we can give them some fluid straight into the stomach. That's mostly for younger children, sort of 1 to 2 years, less than 2 years of age. Occasionally we'll bring children into hospital and pop a drip in and we can give them fluid that way. So it really depends on how dehydrated the child is and how likely it is to continue. But some of these steps might help you manage the dehydration at home so you can avoid a trip to the hospital. And that's about it for today's show. Thank you so much for joining me. For all these videos and more, head to the Channel 31 YouTube channel. I'll see you next time.